Well, hey folks, I'm Josh. Welcome back to the shop. Today I want to take a minute and share kind of an update review of this knife right here. This is a Great Eastern Cutlery Farm and Field edition of the Pocket Carver. Now, there's several iterations, if you will, of the Pocket Carver. What changes is kind of the trim. There's a couple of varieties that have metal bolsters and then different woods and stuff inside. The Farm and Field one is this is micarta, I believe, and it's a little bit cheaper, not by a lot, but a little bit. And so, you know, overall they're going to perform similarly, but maybe just look a little bit different. So this is the Farm and Field edition of the Pocket Carver by Great Eastern Cutlery. And I have had it for just over a year now. It was actually a Father's Day gift last year at Father's Day. So that was, you know, a couple weeks ago now. So I've had it for a little bit longer than a year, and I've had time to get used to it and adjust the blades a little bit and use it quite a bit and do some carving with it, and maybe a little bit of time to compare it to some other knives that I have. And I gotta say that I really like this knife. So with this knife you get one big blade that you can use to kind of hog off lots of wood and stuff like that. It's got a good shape to it, a nice taper to the tip there, and it's beefy enough that you can really do some decent wood removal with that. And then you also have two smaller blades. You have that one, and then on the other side another, and they are from the factory exactly the same. And that works out pretty well. Initially I thought, oh, two blades that are exactly the same, why not get a different blade shape for something? But really, for carving, I really like this shape anyway, and it's fine to have two that are exactly the same profile, because it's nice to use one. So, you know, I'll do the major carving with this and get it down to kind of the closer shape that I'm going for, and then I'll switch to this one and I'll use it to do some more refining, and then I will save this blade for just my finishing cuts. And then I always have a very sharp blade with me for some nice smooth finishing cuts. And then you know, then I don't have to worry about stropping this blade maybe quite as often while I'm out carving, because I have this one to use for those nice finishing cuts, and that works out. As you can see, it says here carbon on that blade, and what that's referring to is that these are made from a 1095 carbon steel, and just for the sake of seeing it, here's the tube that it came in. I still have that laying around, and I believe it says, yeah, there we go, 1095 carbon steel, and so that's what those are made from. And that means, you know, that it will take and hold a good edge. Maybe not as hard as some of the more modern steels, but soft enough to still be able to sharpen fairly easily and keep sharp. So I think that the 1095 is actually a really good balance as far as toughness and edge durability and things like that. And it still takes a really nice keen edge that'll give you good faceted, clean cuts. And so I really appreciate that. The only real issue is it's not as rust proof. You know, it's not a stainless steel, it's a high carbon steel that has the chance to rust. But you know, this could use a little cleaning, but it's not rusted. And I'm not taking super good care of this knife. Like, I'm not like every single time I use it, I don't wipe it down and oil it. You know, it gets some pocket time, and I'll use it, and every once in a while I wipe it down and clean it a bit and maybe put a drop of oil on there, but nothing major, and it's holding up really well. If you were to compare this to a brand new one thing you might notice is the scales here. This micarta is actually darkened up a bit. It's picked up, I don't know, probably some oils and dirts and stuff like that from my hands, and I kind of like the looks of that actually. It's got a little more character and it's a little darker, so that's kind of cool. Really nice things about this knife: it comes super sharp out of the box. It holds an edge really well. It is a really good size for your hand. If you know, at least for my hand, I think I have a pretty average hand. And that handle fits across there really well. It's not so small that it's hard to hold on to. For example, this is an old Bulldog Whittler knife. It's called the Sunday Whittler, I believe. And it's a really nice, fairly similar blade situation, it's got a pen blade there, but the handle is too small. I mean, it's really nice for your pocket and maybe for some quick whittling and things like that. It's not too bad, but that handle's a little too small for me to get my hands around and feel comfortable holding. I really like the knife, it's cool looking, but it's just not as comfortable in the hand as this. This is big enough that you can get, you have good control and a nice firm grip, and you can get some leverage on it without, like this one, which is going to dig into your hand and give you some hot spots and things like that. So this is a really good size. The 3 blades are kind of nice. It did end up being pretty useful. I honestly use the 2 smaller blades the most. The bigger blade does not see as much action, but it still sees plenty of use. Only real cons that I can think of with this knife, and they're pretty minor. And the first one isn't really the fault of Great Eastern Cutlery, it's just the situation of this steel, and that's that this steel is kind of brittle. And on one of these blades, if you look really close, let's see which one is it. It's this one. I actually snapped the very tip of the blade off. If you look really close, it's not a perfect point, and that's because it must have, I didn't notice doing it, but at some point while carving, I got it stuck in a piece of wood, I suppose, and must have wiggled it enough to snap that very tip off, and so I had to reshape that a little bit. You can barely tell when you compare it to the other blade, but it did chip. So it's a brittle steel because it's that 1095 and it's been hardened to a really high Rockwell hardness. So you get brittle steel, but that means it takes a good edge. So it's just something to be careful of. That's really not their fault, and that's kind of the price you pay for having the ability to have a nice sharp edge. My only other, two other real issues is, one is it comes from the factory super sharp, but it also comes from the factory with micro bevels on it, and I prefer a convexed edge on my smaller whittling blades. So I convexed those, and that just means that the edges aren't flat as it comes over that micro bevel. Instead, you kind of round off that edge a little bit. I did a whole video on micro bevels versus convex bevels on small whittling blades, and so you can watch that as I compared the two, and I definitely come out thinking that micro bevels are a lot better. So you have to spend a little time with that factory edge, putting that bevel on there, or reshaping perhaps, but that's more a matter of preference. So I guess you can't really count that as a con. It's just kind of the way it comes. But one thing that I don't super appreciate about this knife is when I first got it, every edge on it was kind of sharp. Now it's way better now that I've used it and carried it, and I actually, like this edge right here and right here, I took a little bit of fine sandpaper to that and just smoothed it a little bit because it was uncomfortable in my hand. It was so sharp of an edge. And like here on the back ends of the blades where it would hit the springs, that still is pretty sharp, and it's really not a huge deal. Occasionally you notice it in your hand when you hit up against one of the blades, but for comparison's sake, if you look at like the edges on a Swiss Army knife, this is just the Super Tinker that I carry the most. These are super smooth, and you don't ever, when you're holding this, feel your finger snagging on that anywhere. And so I appreciate that about the Swiss Army knives, and I notice it on this Great Eastern Cutlery knife. Now, does that mean that it has nice, smooth, crisp, sharp edges? Yes, it does, but it also is just not as nice in your hand. And when holding a tool, I like to feel, I just like the way that this feels because of those nice smooth edges better than this. And another knife that does a good job of having those nice smooth edges and just such a nice feel in the hand, this is a Case Seahorse Whittler, and oh my gosh, just the edges on this are just so nice to touch, which I don't know, maybe if you've held a knife that's got a nice finish on it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's one thing that I notice about this knife, that those sharp edges right there, you don't feel that at all on this Seahorse, but you do. Whew, that is kind of pointy, honestly. So, you know, I could round that off a little bit with some fine paper, and I have touched that up a little bit, but it's still pretty sharp. So it's one thing that I notice. Obviously, it doesn't keep me from using this knife. It is by far my favorite pocketable folding, you know, whittling carving knife. So it's the one I go to. And, you know, for the sake of noticing, I have plenty to choose from. I have quite a few knives. So you've seen I have the Case Seahorse Whittler, which has a very similar blade situation. You know, has one big honkin' blade. That one's even bigger. It's actually so big that it's a little bit silly, but it's kind of nice to have. And you have that guy and that guy. So pretty similar, 2 smaller blades, 1 bigger blade, and you know, a pretty nice similar size, really similar size. This one, the Seahorse, is a little longer, but not much, and it's got that kind of unusual, you know, the Seahorse shape to it. You know, comparing the two, I would rather use the Pocket Carver any day. I just really like it a lot better. The blades are better, they hold a better edge. This is made out of Case's stainless steel, and it is a totally fine whittling knife, don't get me wrong, but they're very similar price, and this is, in my opinion, a much better functioning carving knife. Another knife that I have that you could compare it to is the Flexcut Whittlin Jack. It is Flexcut's kind of, you know, solution to this situation. The handle, a little bit longer, a little bit more substantial, broader, not as easy to carry in your pocket, but it is comfortable. Because of that size, it's maybe a little bit more comfortable long term, but I don't honestly, I've used this thing for, you know, a good solid hour and not had an issue. But you know, if I was sitting at my bench, I'd probably grab a solid handle non-folding knife, but out and about, I don't mind using this one. And this one is not as portable. The blades on it are bigger, so that's the smaller blade on the Flexcut Whittlin Jack. For comparison's sake, this is, you know, it's a bigger, more substantial blade, but it does taper down nicely. And you know, the Flexcut blades, I don't ever touch those up from the factory. You just maybe throw them on a strop for a second and they're good to go. So I do appreciate that about Flexcut. And the blades are super hard to open on this thing. So that's one thing that the Pocket Carver does much better is, you know, it's got easier to open, and it's got half stops, which are nice, and a good snap, so you know you closed it. Whereas this guy, no half stops and much harder to open, and I'm sure that'll loosen up more and more as I use it more and more, but I've had this one for a while and it's still a pretty stiff open, and there is not that nice satisfying snap that you get with the other one. So now the larger blade on the Flexcut is a pretty good sized blade, and you know, to compare it to the Pocket Carver, pretty similar. Here's the Seahorse Whittler to compare to. And you know, I don't need this big of a blade on a knife that I'm carrying in my pocket, but it is nice to have. I have other knives when I really want to hog something out that I can grab, but as far as pocketing goes, this one is still my favorite to grab. I use this one quite a bit too, and this one's fun, but the Pocket Carver is the best one in my opinion. I also have, for comparison's sake, here's the Carvin Jack from Flexcut, and it's got lots of different knives and stuff to use, and gouges and spoon stuff, and you know, all kinds of crazy stuff inside there. But it's bigger, not as comfortable in the hand because of these funky things going on, and it's really not pocket friendly. Like, I'm not going to put this in my pocket. It's just too big to put in my pocket. It comes with this sheath, which I'm not a belt sheath kind of guy. Some people are, more power to you, but that's just not my thing. So I don't tend to put this in my pocket, but I will put this in my pocket and carry it around, you know, when I'm out with the kids or whatever. But this one, it'll be in more of a designated carving kit and that kind of thing. So all in all, really a big fan of the Great Eastern Cutlery Farm and Field Pocket Carver. They're harder to find than some, and I'm sure they'll do another run of them at some point, so they'll get easy to find again. If you get a chance to pick one up and you like to carve on the go, I love this knife. Of these, you know, 4 knives, it's definitely my favorite. I also do a fair amount of carving with a Swiss Army knife with a little bit modified blade on the small blade of a Swiss Army knife, and so for comparison's sake on that, you know, that's a pretty similar blade as far as length and utility, but this holds a better edge than this and is a little more comfortable in the hand than a Swiss Army knife because of some of this other stuff that's on here, but this is pretty much always in my pocket, whereas this I only carry when I know I'm going to be carving and things like that. So anyway, Great Eastern Cutlery Pocket Carver. Really big fan, and hope this was useful. So thanks a bunch. Have a good one. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next video. Have a good one.